All right, thanks for coming out. So, real quick, how many people have been to the Jejune Institute? How many people have seen the documentary? Keep your hands up if your answer was yes to any of those. Okay.
Yeah, if your answer was yes to either, put your hand up.
All right, great. Excellent,
cool.
Excellent. Okay.
You guys have no idea what's going on.
So one of the things we're going to do, we basically have, we don't spend a ton of time, or haven't in the past, spent a ton of time talking about the kind of behind the scenes, what went on in terms of making it, and so we're going to take this, we spend a little bit of time talking about what our larger kind of philosophy and goals, and we've done that a bunch in public, and Jeff speaks very eloquently about that. Jeff is the third member of the full-time crew who produced the Jejune Institute, who is not here, but is still up in the Bay Area working hard on the next installment of the next project. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go through just some of our lessons learned over the past few years. The Jejune Institute opened in 2008 and ran for just under 3 years in San Francisco. It was a drop-in, anytime, immersive experience in the city, with each chapter in a different neighborhood. And it ran for just under 3 years, and so closing in the spring of 2011. So in the intervening time, both Uriah and I have worked on other projects, have kind of brought our lessons learned from the Jejune Institute into those and had a little bit of distance and time to reflect.
Yeah, definitely. This is probably the most we've talked about it ever upon reflection, and we found that all of our takeaways were not even necessarily the same.
Yeah. So when we were reviewing notes and saying, well, okay, what do we want to talk about? What is significant? What can we share for this? We agreed on a lot of the points, and then we said, oh, but my takeaway was exactly opposite from your takeaway. There are also a lot of things we agreed on, but we'll cover all angles, and you can take which lessons are your favorites. So just really briefly, we want to introduce the overall kind of just a little mood setting. So we're going to tune into Radio Nonchalance very briefly. So this is from episode 2. There's a pirate radio station that you could only tune into in Single Park in San Francisco. And so we're going to take a couple of moments to listen to the dulcet tones, and we'll cross our fingers this works, of Commander 14, also known as, voiced by the ever amazing Hal Robbins, talking about the Sleepwalker.
You like cartoons, don't you? Of course you do. Everyone likes cartoons. Now picture in your mind a cartoon character, any cartoon character, sleepwalking. You've seen this cartoon before, haven't you? Observe as our animated protagonist stumbles blindly out of bed, down the stairs, and out the front door, onto a busy street. He easily but narrowly dodges impending danger, seemingly without effort or awareness. Bricks from a construction site almost, but do not, fall on him. Cars come within a hair's breadth of running him over. At the last minute, as he's about to step into an open manhole in the street, he's miraculously spared the fall. And after numerous similar close calls, his unconscious path is turned around in a revolving door, and in his own building, by fortunate coincidence, he's somehow returned to bed, unharmed by the end of the cartoon. It's a certain definite attribute this character possesses, to be able to stumble and goof through life, with nary a care, prodigiously protected and provided for, and guarded by extraordinary good luck, is called divine nonchalance. Our concept may have its origins in the Book of Thoth, or that deck of fortune-telling cards called the Tarot. It appears on the card which is listed as number 0 in the major arcana. That card is the Fool.
All right, so that's actually a fair description of where we were coming into this experience. So we came from a bunch, the three of us came from really different backgrounds. Uriah's experience, my experience was really from the art side. I'd done a lot of participatory things that were addressing space and public space in different ways, but nothing kind of to the extent or length immersion as this. Uriah had...
I was an audio engineer, like just walking out of school, never done any experiential design or, played some street games, never played an ARG. Honestly, never heard of an ARG when I got engaged in this myself. Jeff was street art, street operations, guerrilla drive-ins, things like that.
So together we kind of each had a little piece of the puzzle, but it was all kind of very new, and so there were a lot of moments where, just like the Fool, we kind of walked off the cliff and were lucky enough to have the cloud kind of float up and catch our foot, so we didn't fall too hard. There were some points where we really did fall. But so we're just going to talk about a couple of those lessons and a couple of those takeaways, and kind of pick and choose and illustrate from some examples from the experience, but we're not really going to dive into too much depth of the overall picture of the thing. So to kind of go into one of the first things that our first takeaway, was one of those moments when the cloud really came up and caught us, and we kind of did something right by accident, which was awesome because it was our first major piece. So I'm talking about the actual Jejune Institute and the induction room. So when you went to the Jejune Institute, you'd go to this rather imposing high-rise in downtown San Francisco, and you'd go up to the 16th floor, and you'd ask for the Jejune Institute, and you'd get handed this key. And the key had some instructions to go to the Induction Center, and you stepped into the Induction Center, and it was this room. It was this installation. So we'd taken over this very tiny office. It was, 15 by 15.
Yeah, it was very small. We squeezed a lot of scenery in there, but it was very cramped.
But this space was fully, Uriah did some amazing work doing audio and video triggers so the room talked to you, and the entire thing was kitted out as a 70s pseudoscience institution. And so you really had an immediately very strong sense of place. So you'd gone through this imposing building, and you came into this place, and you were there. You were immersed. And this also represented a large part of our budget, both our production budget for not only episode 1, but our overall spending in terms of keeping the thing open, because we were renting office space in downtown San Francisco. But it was totally, totally worth it, because what this did, and this was, again, one of those, we backed into it, but what it did was this whole thing set the scene. So you went in and you sat down and you watched this video presentation and you looked around at all of the objects in the room, and we were very controlled how many people could go in the room, because so that you were really, you could only have a maximum 3 people in the room, so that your experience was really all about looking out at this thing and, taking in everything from the bookshelf, which kind of painted this portrait of this institution, to the video itself, giving you the history and introducing Octavio Coleman, our main antagonist, although you didn't know that yet. And so you were immediately immersed. You had this primer. You didn't know quite where you were, but you knew you were somewhere.
Yeah, the level of detail that went into the room was really seamless. It was fully automated, but unless you really peeked around, you'd have no idea why. Something you don't see in here, there's stuff like a live oscilloscope that was actually acting and responding, and it was really seamless the way we put it together. It was like you were there. This was not a set. This was an office.
And so the thing that did was, this was a space that we controlled entirely, and that was really great, because the rest of the space, the rest of the experience was embedded into the fabric of the city and relied on little pieces being ours, but that were mainly controlled by other businesses, that happened on the street, that happened because you were listening to it on your headphones, that happened because you tuned in to the radio and we didn't control how you tuned into the radio. So all of these things, we lost control purposely. We ceded control for basically all of the other elements except for this room. And so that set us up in a really wonderful way. You walked out of this room going, this scene, everything now, the entire city has become part of this experience. And so even though you walked out of the room with just a little dinky sheet of paper, that sheet of paper took on a significance that was altogether much higher than if you had just printed out the paper at home and went on the same experience.
Yeah, I mean, the immersive level of it gave the production value that people would walk out and look at every single person, every single shady-looking person, transient, whatnot, wondering if they were with us. That gave us the ability of not having to hire all these people, but having them be perceived as with us. So, really, it paid off. It was so worth.
And again, it was only by accident, really. We didn't know that was going to set us up for such great success. But if I did it over again, and I have in subsequent things, really focused on what's that doorway? What doorway are you setting up to capture your audience and to set that scene so that they're taking those lessons, that scene setting, that story into everything else that they're about to experience.
Yeah, I think one of the points I love that really illustrates how significant it was the fact that internally we refer to this production as the Games of Nonchalance. Pretty much everyone else calls it the Jejune Institute. To us, that was episode 1. To everyone else, that was the game.
So moving right along, we have our next lesson was curtains are not your friend. So we were behind, metaphorically, behind the curtain for about the first 6 months. Nobody knew that this was something that we had made. It was the Jejune Institute. They had a website, they had hours. There was no point that it said, Sara and Uriah and Jeff made this thing. There was no company website. There was nothing that pointed to this for the first 6 months. And that set us up for some interesting things. And this is actually one of the points where Uriah and I disagree. But from where I sit, curtains are not your friend.
Or are they?
So basically, when you came in those first 6 months, you might approach the Jejune Institute from one of these flyers on the street. So this is San Francisco, so there are a lot of nutty flyers on the street. They fit right in.
Yes.
So we definitely had a couple of people who came in, and I honestly believe that they thought these were this is a product of the Jejune Institute, products and services of the Jejune Institute, so the Vital Orbit Human Force Field, the Memory to Media Center that Haim alluded to, where you could have your dreams put on VHS tape or Betamax. I think they transitioned.
Yeah,
out
it
of
had to be
Betamax.
analog tape due to the magnetic transference.
You know. So they had all these products and services, and we played up this kind of in-narrative gateway to come in. There was never an out-of-narrative point where we said, hey, Nonchalance invites you to come to the Jejune Institute. This is a really awesome thing that we made, and we'd like you to come. We could have done it a little less campy than that, but we never said anything like that. We just had these flyers and some Craigslist postings from some of our characters, and that was really about it for the first 6 months. And that made it very difficult for anybody to write stories about us. So there were journals who were interested, but they had no idea how to even approach writing about us because they had nobody to contact and they had no way to frame their article except, well, I think this is a fictional thing, but I don't even have the sources to say whether or not it's fictional. So that caused some problems. So our attendance was much lower. We had a much kind of slower trickle. Most people who did go and who kind of became clued into the fact that this wasn't a real cult and wasn't going to abduct them would not tell their friends anything. So the common thing when you went to the Jejune Institute, you would say, this was amazing. You have to go. I can't tell you anything. Which is, depending on the person, not going to get the maximum amount of audience. So by this first 6 months, we'd gotten basically everybody in San Francisco who was willing to take a chance and go, okay, this might be a cult, but that's enough to get me to go in. They might not abduct me. So after the first 6 months, we kind of slowed down, and it was just this kind of trickle. And so I think we could have done better. I think if I were to do it over again, I would have said, all right, we can get out in front of this. And in fact, I did have it to do over again. So recently, as Chaim alluded to, worked with Disney Imagineering to put together The Optimist, which was a more traditional alternate reality game experience. So it was an event-based thing. It ran from one specific time. It opened and closed in the space of 6 weeks. And so it had a really arc that kind of you had to follow along. So a little unlike the Jejune Institute in that way, but we made the decision to say, okay, this is fiction, and it's just like a novel. There's a cover, and it says, a novel by Disney Imagineering. And you can play this, and you can become part of this fiction, but you have to, and that's okay. And one of the great things was that people actually, that was fine. They were able to opt in. They opened the novel, and once they opened the novel, they were in it. They were able to interact with the characters. They treated they had deep emotional relationships with the characters, and were able to interact, and that was all great. They could close the novel, and they understood where the boundaries of the fiction. They understood that, okay, this is fiction, and I can turn it on and turn it off.
Au contraire, Sarah. Sorry, this leaning is awkward to me, so I'm going to hold this like this while I talk. I don't know if this looks more awkward. Counterpoint being, from my point of view, one of the negatives was scary cult made even scarier. I look at that as a net positive. Basically, to me, the immersion is paramount. I would rather some people walk away from a seamless immersive experience. This is definitely not to counterpoint all the disadvantages of all of these disadvantages are absolutely real. It's really hard to get people in. Only a certain type of person will come. A wise man once said, those dark horses with the spirit to look up and see, for those dark horses with the spirit to look up and see, a recondite family awaits. I liked the curation of the crowd. You got a certain kind of person. And basically, counterpoint to The Optimist, which is great production, what Nonchalance is working on right now, which I can't tell you anything about, is secrecy is paramount. So I would offer that, I guess, I would be willing to give up the wider exposure in exchange for a more immersive experience with a more curated audience. So that's my point of view.
I would add that Nonchalance has also built up quite a bit of trust in that
Yes.
audience and
Yes.
cultivated an audience for what they're doing.
We have that advantage of having an audience for it. We have trust. We already have people waiting to know what we're doing next. So that's an advantage of still being able to be secret is that they're hunting us already.
Whereas when the Jejune Institute launched, nobody knew who we were. And those that did know Jeff from Oaklandish, there was no plus from that connection because nobody was able to make that connection. So that leads really nicely into our next kind of lesson, which was nebulous borders. This experience that kind of bled between. It framed itself as, okay, the Jejune Institute is real. It has a real office space, and it's a real place that you can go and visit. And so the borders of where the fiction stopped and the real world started were very gray. And that was both a really great thing and a thing that caused us a lot of pain. So you had things like these. So these were microwave harassment stickers. So these were framed up in the same way that you'd have a any other warning sticker on an electrical box or what have you, warning about high voltage. This was warning you about microwave harassment. And so the really wonderful thing is because these took on the language of the environment, and really the border between what's an actual warning sticker and what's a warning sticker that's part of this fiction was so gray that municipal workers, when they went in to clean up graffiti, so you can see there's a little bit of that yellow that's sticking out, and you can see the yellow at the bottom. When the municipal workers went in to clean up graffiti, they would paint around our stickers because they really felt, because the municipal workers weren't sure where the edges of the experience were. And they didn't even have the benefit of visiting the Jejune Institute.
I would hope some of them did.
Hopefully. So that created a really wonderful thing of, well, there's this kind of, anything could be part of this, and I don't know where the edges are, and that feeling that can imply that so much more of it is actually part of it than the things that we physically made. So it becomes a much larger seeming experience. But there were some big negatives. Like I mentioned, we were in a professional office building, and so in that professional setting, we only rented 2 offices, right? We had our Nonchalance production office, and we had the Jejune Institute. Nobody came to the Nonchalance production office, just us.
Nobody even knew we were there.
And so that set up this expectation. Actually, there were many, many people, especially early on, who thought that we had rented the entire floor, and that the entire floor was part of the Jejune Institute. Hi. And you are not alone.
Yeah. No, there was a class that was taught, and one of the units was on the Jejune Institute, and they spoke of it as if we were a group that had rented the entire floor.
Which, if only.
Yeah.
But next time. But we shared this floor with a lot of small business small business professionals. So there were court reporters. There were lawyers. There were accountants. So there were a lot of people who were handling, among other things, sensitive information. And so at the end of our experience, at the end of our Chapter 1 experience, you returned up to the office, and we kind of did a little handoff for our digital kind of segue into the next chapter, which was, you had a little online portion that kind of handed you off to Chapter 2. This being 2008, not everybody had a mobile device that had the web on it. And so people were really ready to do this, and so they looked for the nearest way that they could check the web, and there happened to be, the computer of the lawyer's aide outside of the lawyer's office, and so that they weren't at their desk sometimes, and so people would just kind of go over to the computer and try and find this website, and that clearly was a problem for the lawyer and became a problem for us. There's a lot of sensitive information, and so there was a moment where those nebulous borders really came back to bite us, and we actually had to rein that in a little bit and be a little bit more specific about what your expectations were, as you were also, this was the first time that you were figuring out where the edges were, so we had to define that just a little bit better.
Yeah. And that kind of brings to the point that one of my takeaways from that is that basically I learned that if you don't tell people or give them some context for exactly what to do, sorry, I just can't lead anymore. If you don't tell them exactly what to do, they will do everything and everything you don't want them to do. This was a mock protest, which we refer to as the action. There was some theatrics involved. Basically, it was an anti-Jejune Institute protest. It was kind of organized by a group of players organized by us, and we were hoping for 50, and we ended up with like a little over 200 people showing up.
Which was awesome.
Yeah, that was insane. I was actually invited to the protest by a friend who had no idea I was involved, and I was like, oh my God, this is terrifying. And so, this is wonderful.
Nice.
Thank you. I got a nice stack of books. So one of the theatrics that we had arranged was an appearance by some Jejune Institute goons and Octavio Coleman. I was terrified, as I'm sure Sara was, that we had riled up an angry mob and then we were going to throw some goons in front of them. And what are they going to do? And so I decided that we needed to tell them what to do, and that the way you fought goons was rigorous silent jazz hands. However, even given that, something that became a part of the lore other than jazz hands, they brought bells. I don't know whose idea it was, but they brought bells. They were armed. You can see them shaking the bells. They were armed with bells. We didn't tell them to bring the bells. We actually ended up integrating it. In fact, when we were talking about, Sara didn't even remember that was not something we came up with. That was something they brought that we then wrote in as having some power.
It was 5 years ago.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. So I remember that particular point. Yeah, so if you don't want people to do something else, you have to tell them what to do somehow. And you can contextualize it within the narrative, which is, this is how you do battle, which is like, don't attack these people. Just jazz hands them. Good to go. We'll be doing, we're doing questions at the end, so
Hold on to
save
that.
it and we'll get to it. You're first in line.
But so just to kind of pull this together, the really amazing thing, so Nebulous Borders, we learned a lot about how to do ground rules, and we had a very quick lesson in that from our players. But and we play tested and learned a bunch of stuff that way. It wasn't all kind of on the fly, seat of our pants. Most of it was. But we also, one of the most amazing compliments that I've been paid, and I think all of us really hear a fair amount, was I played this experience, I went through this experience, and I look at the entire city differently. I knew that I was finished with Chapter 1. I knew that I had concluded the Chapter 1 experience, the Jejune Institute downtown portion. And I left, and I've lived in the city 5, 10, 20, all of my life. And I look at everything differently. I'm looking at things that I never noticed before, all of a sudden. And it's because I played this, because those Nebulous Borders encouraged me to look at everything again in the context of this narrative and in the context of just the way that we really invited people to look, because things were embedded, because of those gray zones. And that is just an amazing, that was really powerful, and I'm really just amazed and delighted that we're able to do that for our players.
Yeah, it's my anecdote with that, with basically creating an experience with such nebulous borders, and basically I spoke to somebody who came to San Francisco on a vacation and experienced the city through this, and decided 6 months later to move to San Francisco because they had wanted to be somewhere where things like this were going on more. And that was quite like oh wow, like we showed you San Francisco. That's humbling, and I'm grateful.
So kind of how these things got made. When we were starting out and we were figuring out, okay, well, we have this room, but everything else we kind of have to work with people, work with what's already there, figure out how to create those nebulous borders, how to create those gray spaces, and lure people through into seeing the city in the way that we had crafted. And so to do that, we had to actually work with other businesses, other people who had the space of, the parking garage, the where do you have a radio transmitter in Dolores Park, that kind of thing. So one of my first jobs, in fact, was looking for. We had figured out this wonderful device of these postcards that we wanted to have you pick up along in the first chapter. And so you went through, and so we said, okay, well, somewhere in Chinatown there's going to be a shop that will vend our postcards, because every shop in Chinatown vends postcards. This is a tourist city. This shouldn't be too hard. I don't speak Mandarin or Cantonese, and honestly, Chinatown is pretty exhausted by, there are a lot of scavenger hunts that go on in there. And so they didn't really, and the actual, they are measuring their sales by, well, this physical amount of space needs to earn me X number of dollars per day, or else it's not worth it. If I'm not making that, so there's a really very real financial proposition to them that I had no way of saying. I can tell you how many people will go through this thing and buy your postcard. I can't tell you that it's a slam dunk. I don't know, and I don't speak your language. And so that turned into a really, I got told no a lot. But I asked a lot of people, and finally, Asian Image agreed to try it out, and we actually, the initial deal in terms of trying it out was they got to keep all the profits. We eventually, were able to rework that deal. So we were able to split it, but initially we said, you keep all the profits, it'll be fine, and we'll come back and renegotiate if you feel like this is successful, which fortunately it was. It was much easier, even though, so in episode 3, we had another in our series of postcards came back in Coit Tower, and so there was only one place that could vend these things. We just had Coit Tower, and that was it. And so we had to get them to agree to it, or we had to cut it from the experience. And we already had set up these nice little series of postcards, so we really wanted to do it. That was way easier than the multiple options that we had in Chinatown. So, because we had numbers that we could point to, because I spoke the language, and because I came in and was able to confidently say, this is what it's gonna be like. You're gonna get this much out of it. Here's what you're gonna make off the space. So, go ahead and ask. Just really briefly, I alluded to how we had this, that pirate radio transmission from Dolores Park that you could only hear in Dolores Park in San Francisco. There's no actual radio tower that looks like this in Dolores Park.
No, we constructed that. It's there now. It's still there. No.
Yeah.
Not really.
No. So they're basically only a couple of, because it's pretty much line of sight. So there are only a very few number of buildings that would work to have a radio antenna from to get this to work. It's on the park is on a hill, so it had to be something on the near or on the top hillside. We experimented with something at the bottom because we already had an inn, and it didn't work at all. And so literally what we did to get somebody who would work with us to put this antenna on the roof was we went around and took down all of the addresses that we thought would work, and then we wrote really nice letters to, dear friend, here's what we're proposing. And we gave them some of our, we produced some nice pieces of artwork at this point, little stickers, and we figured, well, if you think that a microwave harassment sticker is cool, I can't remember exactly what we put in there. Maybe we didn't put a microwave harassment sticker in, but we put something nice in. That might have been.
I think it might have been security stickers. Yeah.
So we put something nice in there for them, and we said, well, if they like this kind of thing, then maybe they'll want to host our transmitter. And fortunately, that worked out.
Yeah. And it was not without incentive. We rented the space.
Yeah,
we paid these people for a small section of their room to keep a transmitter on and just glance at once in a while and make sure it was still running. But even though we still tested it ourselves, it was not without incentive.
So ask, and people will do amazing things that they never even thought that they'd agree to or would have considered part of their life beforehand.
Or was a thing that could happen.
Yeah.
Another point of you never know what, ask people. So this is Gordo. He played a character called Dry Bones. He's not in costume in this picture, or he might be. This is how Gordo dresses. Love Gordo to death. He came upon us. If you saw the Institute refers to this basically. We were flyering and he found us and was like, oh my gosh, you guys. And then we decided when we were, I believe we were trying to do some guerrilla street theater for GDC. And so we were like, well, what about that guy Gordo that works at the costume shop? And again, he works at a costume shop, but this is actually how he dresses on a day-to-day basis. which is great because people still run into him on the street and refer to him as Dry Bones, the character name, and he will still be Dry Bones for them for that interaction. And basically we were just like, hey, you guys are improv theater comedy. You want to do some street theater for us, you know? And it was as easy as that. They were like, yes, absolutely, let's do it. It was like we gave them 2 guys and we're like, oh, we want this little interaction, and they came in with these character backstories they had written and why these guys were in conflict, and just like hit it out the park. So never hurts to ask.
So this is one of those really obvious in retrospect, but you gotta remember, we didn't think, we thought initially maybe this will be open for a year. We'll release all the episodes and they'll all be going, and then we'll close it down. And of course, it as alluded to before, it was very slow to start. And then it got rolling, and it was something that we said, oh, this is actually worth keeping open, and we spent a little bit longer in development on the episodes, and so rolled them out, and they were all rolled out after about a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
But each of the episodes revolved around some piece of media, whether it's these physical cards from episode 1, or the transcripts and radio broadcasts from episode 2. Each episode revolved around actually a piece of media that had to be play tested and had all of this functional stuff that had to work, and that related to the physical environment. And so of course, it's a living city. It changes, and so really early on we got a lesson in that.
So if you want to know the secret to a really great magic trick, it's if you want to make a phone booth disappear, include it as a necessary portion of an immersive media adventure, and that phone booth will just disappear. It might actually fall on the ground like a dead body at first, which this one did, and then it will disappear in its entirety an hour before people start walking through needing to use it.
Yeah, so we were out scouting for this first episode, and so we said, we came along and found this phone with it had a beautiful little roof.
Pagoda phone.
It's great. How could this is so nonchalance. How could we not use this? And it gives us an opportunity to have Octavio call you on the phone because he knows that you followed his instructions even though he told you not to, and be a little menacing. And it's just this, we got to add a little audio in, and was this perfect? How could we not include this? So, right? About 2 months into, we've launched, and we have our steady trickle coming through, because we're still behind the curtain, but people could show up any time. Jejune Institute opens at noon, and that's just how it goes. So people could show up any time. We go out and we check, and make sure things are looking good, and it's lying on its side. And then a couple days later, it's just gone, and there's a hole with wires in the ground sticking out. So you can see in the corner of this, we've chalked up just the really quick, oh no, people are coming.
Yeah.
This needs to function. This is actually serves a mechanical function as well as having a nice creepy call from Octavio. So we gotta give them a little something. So you see our little hastily chalked up.
I remember it was like a dual stage, because when it was on the ground, we were like, oh, well, there's still a phone number in the phone book, and it's still there. And then coming out later, like, oh no, now it's gone. Grab some chalk.
Yeah. And so we eventually designed around it, but this is one of those lessons, reality checks of, okay, the landscape is going to change. It is not certain. You need to design for that.
Yes.
And so we did a lot better as we went along.
Yes, this is why we, during the transaction, which was the get a phone call, go dance with the B-boy and Sasquatch and get the transcript thing, if you know what that is. Basically, this operation started with, once again, making a call to telling players to be at these payphones at this time. I tested these phones so many times on so many days, and the very first day they decided to stop receiving calls was the day that somebody was standing in front of this phone waiting for a call. We had a plan B. Plan B was we had everyone's cell phone numbers. So we called them on their cell phones, and that worked out beautifully. Until one of them didn't answer their cell phone. After 3 calls, were not answering their cell phone. Luckily, we also had a plan C, which was we had boots on the ground filming for surveillance, and we actually had to have him walk up to this person and be like, you need to answer your cell phone.
Thanks, Mars.
Thank you, Mars, yes. Luckily, that worked out, but that's why, like, you know, if I could give a tip for productions, always have a plan B, a plan C. If you have time, but you won't, a plan D.
So one of the things that we looked at really wanting to design for, and that was really a big success, was getting people to approach the city differently. And so that could be something as simple as taking a second look at that sign on the fence, to how your view is framed. So these were those cards that I alluded to taking the route through the parking garage instead of going around it. You're cutting through it. You're going through the office building. You're going through the back exit instead of going back out the front door. You're changing how you navigate the city. And so designing for that, encouraging that behavior, and including changing how you look for things. So this was one of those hidden in plain sights kind of moments. This is the path up to Coit Tower, and there's this rock wall. And so there are these little crannies as you go up the rock wall, and they're about knee height, or for some people shin height. And so you don't really notice them, but they become real unless you're a knee height person. They were a very big hit. So we made these little installations that, if you're a normal size if you're an adult size person, you only notice when you're participating in this experience. Otherwise, you don't know. You're just pass right by.
This was something we could have done better.
Yeah.
And we take away as a point for the future, both a lesson for you and ourselves.
So one of the things this experience was really all about, when we designed, we said, okay, this is a single player or small group experience. And you're going to go through each chapter, and you might not go through with the same people, but it's just going to be a small group thing. And it was designed for that, and I think that worked out. On that level, it worked pretty well. But what we didn't plan for was, I went through it at a different time than Uriah. We had the same experience. We had this shared sense of being in on this big mystery, and so that made us a part of the same club. And
But where does that club meet?
Yeah. So we had this very dinky little flash site that had little pieces of our story, and our players could add their own cards of themselves in that.
They were floating in the ether.
Yeah. But that's not really a social space. It was just the barest minimum, and it didn't really work out.
Also, you get like a couple hundred people making cards in a flash file like that, and the flash file starts to bog down.
Crawl.
Or die.
Yeah. So that was not very good. And it meant that a lot of people looking for that social space ended up on the Unfiction forum, which became kind of the place where this congregated. But it's a forum, and it's devoted to more traditional alternate reality game experiences that are very linear and event-based. So it's this thing happens on this day, and then the next thing happens. And ours wasn't really formulated like that. It was something you could return to. I could have the same experiences you had the next month. I could go, and then we could come back together and bring a new friend, and we could both do it again and have the same experience. And so it didn't really work out because people were coming to it at all different stages, and it wasn't the right space to welcome in this group of people who are now self-identifying as part of this group. So if we had it to do over again, building that space from the start, building a space that's formatted for the type of experience, the type of group that's going to form around this, and giving them a place to be social and be part of that club.
Yeah, I personally, given it to do again, wouldn't hope for the Unfiction forums to be the cloud that came up and met. I would want to build that bridge ahead of time.
And then we so yeah. So this ran for just a little shy of 3 years, and really the last year's worth, it was at capacity. And when I say at capacity, there was a really physical capacity for that room. We only allowed 3 people in. We started to kind of let,
Maybe 4 toward the end, maybe pre-booked groups, slightly larger.
But there's a physical number of people that we wanted to fit in the room, and then there's a physical capacity that you can actually fit in that room. It's a small room.
Yeah, 4 groups an hour, so many hours a day. That's all you get.
That's it. And so what would happen is the thing was booked up through, you could come in. If you came in the middle of the afternoon, you probably weren't going to get to go that day.
Oh yeah, on a weekend, absolutely not. If
No.
you were not in if you came in at 2, you weren't getting in.
Yeah. So, and this was basically for the last year of it. And so that had a lot of real consequences to how we had designed this thing. We hadn't designed for that level of success.
No, I think we hoped for it and aimed for it, and then when it came, we realized we hadn't considered the implications of it.
Yeah. So we're in this very imposing office building, but that office building, that high rise in downtown San Francisco, is much less imposing when there's a group of people who are showing up for an entertainment experience. If you're on your own and you're showing up and you're going into this, big building and it has this, marble lobby, and you're the only person who's doing that, you feel like, okay, I'm gonna abide by the rules of the big office building. I'm gonna be on my best behavior. When you're part of a large group and you see the other people coming in and you see them going, okay, I'm here for an entertainment experience, and you see, okay, those people are behind me and they're waiting for the same experience, it changes how you approach it, and it changes your mindset of how you're gonna be in there. So we had no holding area. We had no place to kind of make sure to monitor or lessen or alleviate that flow, give them something to do along the way. There was just nothing. You ended up in the lobby and you just that was it.
Toward the end, we did actually start doing things like we had a sign-up sheet. So if you showed up and we were going to have to tell you, you got to come back at 2:30, we'd actually write you in and you could go get a coffee. But that was the best we could do.
Yeah, and this also had some, just in terms of the traffic flow through other areas, that we were sending people through areas that were not private, but were generally not high traffic public areas.
Mm-hmm.
And that had some pretty real consequences as well. And basically, all of that added up to, there were a bunch of other reasons why, behind the decision to close it down when we did, but basically, at that point, we were about to get kicked out.
Yeah, we would have been kicked out soon. We
Yeah.
would have had to go somewhere else very soon.
So we would have had to redesign from the ground up regardless at that point, just because of the popularity. And we hadn't designed for that from the outset.
No.
So the last point, I hope you all, as designers, already are doing this. But listening to your players, it's an amazing thing to have the internet and have people tell you about what they love and which parts they love and want from you, and to be able to respond to that and honor that is an amazing, amazing thing. But just sometimes.
Not all the time.
Yeah, so those people, this is just to give you an idea of just kind of the complexity of some of the things that we're tracking. This is just episode 1 flowing into episode 2. And so the moments when our players could, so we wanted to listen to them, and we wanted to honor that, and we did find ways to do that successfully. But one of the traps with the internet is that you can be a single person and have a really loud voice, because other people who are enjoying it might not express it. They might enjoy it and tell their friends, but they might not pipe up and be very loud in a digital space that we could hear. And so the only people that you're hearing are going to be a kind of very vocal minority.
Mm-hmm.
And that vocal minority sometimes represents sometimes represents the opinions of your larger player base, and sometimes they're just a vocal minority.
Yeah, I mean, listen to what they say, take it in, but when they say jump, you definitely did not say how high.
Yeah. So there were a couple of moments where we got a little lost in listening to them a little too much and designing for them, where we probably could have just sat back and said, okay, we've made something that's pretty solid, and turn down our volume on their critique.
Yeah, we had spun our wheels a bit on a lot of things that were not necessary for the overall production, and we don't think stood up to the quality because we were trying to spit out content. So we should have not been listening so much in that point, as opposed to the other point, which I'll take responsibility. Sara wasn't around during the seminar, so I production managed the seminar. If you know, we held a all-day seminar for the Jejune Institute. We decided at that point to pull the rug once again out from under the players, not give them what they were expecting. They were expecting some theatrical, silly, like people like Gordo running around looking crazy and laughing and theatrics, and we decided we were going to hold a seminar instead. And it was a very conceptual...
It was 5 hours.
It was 5 hours. That's one thing I would do differently. That was way too long. But I stand by what we did. I stand by what we did. But I swear, I stand by what we did. But I know what we did wrong. I know one of the major things we did wrong, other than the fact that it was 5 hours and didn't need to be. We pulled the rug way too hard. We did not listen to people, did not communicate with people well beforehand. We did not set them up. In the desire to pull the rug out from under them, we completely set them up to hit their head on the floor when we pulled the rug. We did not prepare them to steady themselves. So when it hit them, some people loved it, some people hated our guts during and afterwards. Some of those people have gotten over it and are our friends now. I don't know about the others. I might still have to be watching over my shoulder.
If you're out there, I hope you didn't bring your tomatoes.
Yeah. So, yeah. Hitler wasn't impressed.
This is actually a fan created thing. This is a screen grab from. It's on YouTube. You can watch the whole thing.
There was a downfall video. It's great. It was actually created by somebody who did like the seminar and was making a crack on the whining of the people who didn't. So there was quite a conflict. But again, I stand by it. I would do it again a little differently. So we didn't strike that balance of listening and giving. We just were like, this is what you're going to like, and we're going to shove it in front of you, and it's going to surprise you, and you're going to swallow it and like it. But when you strike the balance of listening and giving.
And so he's actually, in this particular one, referencing a point when I think the balance was struck pretty well.
Don't stop the rock.
Yeah. So this is the end of that transaction video. So you get to dance with Sasquatches, and that's really awesome and exciting. And was one of those moments where there were a bunch of really core players who we wanted to do something really special for and keep them active, and this did just that. And it worked out well. But there were
this is what can go wrong. Many people felt this at the end, and that's their prerogative.
Yeah, we hear you. So, but on the whole, your audience, your players are just the most amazing thing, and respecting that and playing with them is really, really important. And so this is the thing that we made. We made these little. They were called little black boxes of nonchalance. They were not black or boxes, and but they were little bits that you could buy, I suppose in-game purchases, to use the lingo, that you could buy, and they would arrive as a package at your house, and from the Elsewhere Postal Service. And so a bunch of our players kind of picked up on this and said, well, if there's an Elsewhere Postal Service, there's probably an Elsewhere Philatelic Society, philatelic being stamp collecting. And so they founded the Elsewhere Philatelic Society and began to start playing within this world that we had created, which was just amazing and really wonderful. And they've continued to do that. So they continue to create it's a grassroots kind of group. They're all just doing this in their spare time and doing it. They're really talented individuals, and this is their website. They create physical objects, all of the stamps that you can collect, more stamps that you can collect in Elsewhere. They have more Jejune-like experiences that they have designed that you can participate in. and little pop-up experiences around the world.
Yeah.
All over Amsterdam,
Yeah.
London, Burning Man, all over. So that's been really, really amazing.
Yeah. Stampsfromelsewhere.com, to plug them, they still operate. The story still lives through them, like to this day. Like they're planning an event, I think, next month.
Yeah. So so there were many other lessons. Those are just a couple that we could fit in the time, and just little snippets of what the overall experience was. If you want to get the full walkthrough, this is another plug, fan created walkthrough of the entire experience. He's a great writer. This is cardhouse.com/where. He's a great writer. He did his entire walkthrough of his experience of it, and it gives just everything. If you want all of the details, this is it. This is much more than you'll get out of the documentary in terms of thoroughness of the details.
Yes, I guess we gotta stop so we can take some questions. We got a couple minutes. Okay. Since we started late,
all right.
We'll go
What was our first question?
This guy's been waiting.
All right.
Thank you so much for this. This was amazing. And now, like, I've read a lot about this project, but now I understand much better what was actually happening. So thank you for bringing it back to reality. I have two questions. First one is concerning the thing with the belt during the protest. I didn't get like the point, like what broke. Like what did players do? Did they throw them?
No, they didn't throw them, and luckily nothing broke. But it was just an example of, even if you tell them exactly what to do, they might do it's an example of how unpredictable people are.
But you said yourself, but you were able to like use it as a benefit by tying it into the narration of the game. So I don't understand.
There's emergent behavior, and some of the emergent behavior will be disruptive, and some of it you'll be able to incorporate back in.
But expect emergent behavior.
But how was it destructive? That's what I'm asking.
The bells were not destructive. I'm not making a point that the bells were destructive. Trying to log into lawyers' computers was dangerously destructive. We nearly got kicked out. So
the second short question is, from this environment that you built that worked so great, the first point of the slides, right? Did you observe any players like stealing stuff or like manipulating the room or something?
Nothing ever disappeared from the room. Well, there was that plant, but that was like overnight. We don't know why. It happened overnight, so it wasn't a player. To our knowledge, nothing was ever stolen from the room.
Which is really it's an amazing testament to the people and to the space that they said, okay, this is not a space that I want to mess with.
Totally.
I understand that part of the rules at least.
Thank you. Do we have another?
Anybody else?
Yeah, this is maybe a really practical question, and this is really amazing. I'm just totally impressed with all of this. But how on earth would you fund something like this?
That one always comes. I've gotten pretty good at this one.
Go for it.
It was basically venture capital, and I really can't say much more than that. That's how good I've gotten at that. So, ta-da!
Yeah.
And you, what do you think?
Yeah, well, here and then there.
Here and then there.
I'm curious about some of the spaces where, like the public spaces where you can input in art pieces and things like that for the game. I mean, like things like putting the antenna in, you can ask people and make sure that it's okay, and just go and put it in. The stuff like the camp piece seems like it would take some time to set up, and you got to paint it. How do you get that in the public space without getting kicked out?
Yeah. So did everybody here repeat just quickly? How do we get permission to do things in public space? So it's a combination. So some of the spaces were private, like we talked about the radio antenna, and then we talked about how we got permission for that. Other spaces are public, and there are different degrees of public.
Mm-hmm.
There's public that's privately owned. There's public that's managed by the city. And so for instance, like you brought up that rock wall. So that's a city park. And working with the city is a very, very slow process. And so that was an example of a point where we said, do it first and ask permission later.
Yes.
Ask for forgiveness than for permission. Because we wanted to get this thing out, and we thought that they were going to be beautiful, and in addition to, as opposed to feeling like vandalism.
Yes.
And they were warmly received by the neighborhood, who embraced them. There was a local news
Yeah,
story.
a news story. What are these?
That had no idea what the connection was to us, but I took this isolated element and said, oh, these are the, and so they were pretty warmly received, and I think we judged our audience pretty well there. We never got our hands slapped for that, and we never had to do the grindingly slow city process. There were other points, like the garage was a weird situation of being both publicly owned. The city owned the garage, but it was privately managed, and so we actually went through the process of asking the people who were leasing, who were running the garage concession, from leasing it from the city, and said, well, can we do this? And they said, it's not our building, it's not our structure, so we can't say yes, but, you know, nobody ever keyed any cars, to our knowledge, and so they kind of told us that they would turn a blind eye as long as things were going okay, and so we just did that.
Yeah.
There were other points where we asked for permission.
Yeah, totally. When you had to. Do we have time for one more? Huh?
So I was going to ask, like, you talked about the phone that disappeared, and you said you were going to have like a website you could go to. Do you think this time around you have like a website, like more defining rules, like say don't destroy anything or take a phone? Because personally, I kind of like that, like whole like there's no borders really. It's just kind of all reality. What do you guys think about that?
You mean I'm not really clear.
I think you would outline the rules better this time.
There was never a website that had the rules.
Yeah,
I'm sorry if I gave that impression.
Oh, like would we?
Nah.
No.
Like anything. Think about even just a screen-based game.
Yeah.
I think we're agreed on that one.
No.
But think about like a screen-based game. This is more about you're learning how to play, right? So a good screen-based game, you have phases of the game that are designed to teach you how to play, to teach you how to interact with this game. And if it's well done, you don't have to actually have a tutorial. You just introduce mechanics as you go through.
Yeah.
And that's part of good design. And so there were areas that we could have designed better in terms of making sure that people didn't get on lawyers' computers and
Yes.
Potentially interface sensitive information. But that's a design. But that was more of a design challenge and less of a here's your walkthrough. This is how you play. Here are the rules.
The best example I think is that I could give is the action thing, in that we didn't say like don't attack people. We said here's how you battle goons. You write it in. You write it into the story. If that became a very powerful weapon from that point on in the story. So.